Amtrak Adventure by Shining Visions. Copyright 2020. Our 30th anniversary was coming up, and that was going to be a big milestone that required a big celebration. Jerry said that he would plan everything, that we were going to do something special for sure, something that we had never done before. I pictured exotic destinations where warm ocean breezes gently fluttered fronds on tall palm trees, arching over beaches with foaming waves crashing onto the sand. A trip of this significance would surely involve pampering spa treatments. I was sure I would be eating canapes while snuggled on the soft pillows of a white cabana on the beach, looking into azure waters before me. "What?" I said suddenly, yanked out of my revelry. "Ride an Amtrak train? That's what you want to do for our anniversary? Ride a train?" I was incredulous, as images of tropical paradise vaporized from my brain. "Yes," he said, "it is something that I have always wanted to do. Train travel is a huge part of American history, and I would love to experience it." And so there it was. Our anniversary trip was to ride an Amtrak train from Chicago to New Orleans. Once we got to New Orleans, we would spend some time there, but the most exciting part to Jerry was a sleeper car train ride. The trip was scheduled for early December, and as the time approached, I must admit that I began to warm up to the idea. In the early 1800s, riverboats and eventually steamboats were the primary source for transporting goods as well as people in this country. But of course, that was limited to the paths the waterways flowed and was why large cities sprung up at the banks of major river hubs. But if there was a need to go further inland, horses had to pull cargo on rough dirt roads, which were sometimes treacherous and slow, depending on weather conditions that sometimes caused flooding and mudslides. The completion of a transcontinental railroad link in 1869 was a momentous achievement for the country. Built mostly by Chinese immigrants, the railroad connected the Pacific coast 1,912 continuous miles to an existing railroad network in Iowa. Trains transformed this country. They not only provided convenient and relatively efficient transportation, they also facilitated growth and development in America. Trains made remote towns more accessible, and everywhere a train stopped, there was commerce. Towns with train depots grew in population. Hotels and restaurants had to be built to accommodate travelers and needed people to work in them. Factories could use trains to ship their wares to other locations for sale. Fresh produce, equipment, and much-needed goods could now be more quickly delivered. In 1916, 98% of all intercity travelers in the United States commuted by rail. It was the most convenient and efficient form of travel at the time. However, as technology progressed through the years, buses, air travel, and automobiles rose in popularity among commuters. By 1940, the percentage of rail travelers dropped to 67%. Rail usage surged during World War II, particularly due to troop movement and gasoline rationing. However, after the war, rail travel continued to decline, falling to 47% by 1950. Rail passenger commuters continued to decline until it reached crisis point in the 1960s, when the U.S. Postal Service diverted their business from passenger trains to hauling mail by trucks, airplanes, and freight trains. It was another nail in the coffin for the passenger rail business. Routes were discontinued and worn-out World War II-era trains were left in disrepair. As a result of this decline, Congress passed the Rail Passenger Service Act of 1970, which established a national railroad passenger corporation to take over the intercity passenger rail service that had been operated by private railroads. From the legislation, Amtrak, which comes from the words America and track, began service on May 1, 1971, serving 43 states and 21 routes. I had recently watched Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. In the movie, a murder occurs on the luxurious train, the Orient Express, and who is a passenger but the famous Belgian detective Hercule Poirot? As Poirot's little gray cells consider the suspects on this train, one watches as they chat in the elegant dining car dressed in sequined and black tie dinner attire. A waiter in a black tuxedo wheels out a serving table lifting the large silver dome, revealing racks of roasted lamb on a shiny platter. Delicate bone china place settings sit atop crisp white linen tablecloths. Expensive wine was served in sparkling crystal stemware placed next to shimmering candles and small vases of fresh-cut flowers. In one scene, Hercule Poirot was preparing for sleep in his chamber, which has paneled mahogany walls, a closet adorned with wood carvings, and a large twin bed covered in feathery pillows and satiny white sheets. Yes, I thought, if riding a sleeper car on an Amtrak train was going to be like this, it will be a fabulous trip. We arrived in Indianapolis very early to board the Amtrak train, called the Hoosier State, leaving at 6 a.m. for Chicago. The drive to Indianapolis to catch such an early train left us feeling pretty sleep-deprived, and we were glad to board the train and settle into a seat to sleep. For this short leg of the trip, we sat in coach and not sleeping cars. Before dozing, I noticed how clean and comfortable the train was, with plenty of room between each row of seats that allowed us to place our suitcases in front of us. I also noticed how empty the train was, so it didn't surprise me when the Indiana legislature decided to no longer fund the Hoosier State, and the train took its last trip only a few months later, in June of 2019. We arrived at Union Station in Chicago in late morning. Because we had sleeper car tickets, we were considered first-class passengers and were therefore allowed in the Metropolitan Lounge. Serving the same purpose as an airport lounge for waiting passengers, this large, two-story, well-appointed area had not only many comfortable seating areas, tables for laptops, a children's play area, but also a complimentary light snacks counter, as well as soft drink machines and a small cash bar. There were gleaming bathrooms with showers and a safe place to store our suitcases. What a great place to wait for our next train. Union Station was designed in 1909, 1 year after the Model T began its production, and its progressive design accommodated automobile traffic. The main building is a square neoclassical structure the size of one city block. The station's exterior boasts wide porticos and large colonnades, and the street-level entrances utilize Bedford, Indiana limestone. When it first opened, the terminal also housed a hospital, a chapel, and a jail cell. I was taken aback by the grandeur of Union Station. The Great Hall at the station center is a 110-foot high atrium where daylight streams in through a huge barrel-vaulted skylight. Lobbies, staircases, and balconies connect to this 24,000 square foot centerpiece room. Travelers can wait for their connections seated on large wooden benches arranged around this vast area. Wide columns are made of textured Roman travertine marble with Corinthian gold leaf decor above on its capitals. The ceilings and insets are adorned with recessed panels with decorative rosettes. Then we saw Rosie, sitting near the entrance to the lounge, being greeted by several people that appeared to be employees of Union Station. The lady who worked at the check-in desk greeted her by first name, and Rosie returned the greeting. There was hugging. The man who worked at the snack counter did the same thing. There were words like, "Welcome back," "So good seeing you again." Rosie had a constant flow of familiar visitors. I paused to watch this exchange until finally my curiosity couldn't stand it any longer. I introduced myself and told her that I couldn't help but notice that she appeared to be very well known in Union Station. Then Rosie began to tell me her Amtrak story. Rosie has always loved riding Amtrak, starting from her childhood. Years ago, after her husband died, to occupy her time, she began riding Amtrak by herself regularly. Living in Louisiana, her favorite route is New Orleans to Chicago and back. When she arrives at Chicago's Union Station, she doesn't leave the station at all. She just settles in at the Metropolitan Lounge for the day until the evening when the train returns her to New Orleans. She has repeated this route countless times. She loves it, and that is why so many people know her at Union Station. She has gotten to know them so well that they ask about each other's families, of their children, and Rosie was even invited to go on vacation with one of her Union Station friends. What a story! Our train, the same one Rosie is waiting on, leaves at 8:30 that night, so we had plenty of time to kill. But we had a mission already planned. We were heading to Chinatown, which was a 2-mile walk from the station. We dug out of our suitcases the warmest clothing we packed and put each one on layer by layer. Chicago winters were not for the faint of heart, but we came prepared. We chose to walk the distance instead of taking a taxi because once we got on the train, we would be mostly sitting for 20 hours. This was our opportunity to move around a little bit beforehand. The December wind in the Windy City was bracing, but we were sufficiently insulated. Our first stop in Chinatown was Lao Szechuan. Lao Szechuan has not only been recognized locally as the best Chinese restaurant in Chicago, but it has also received national praises, including the best Chinese restaurant and one of the top 10 Chinese restaurants in the U.S. We were seated at a small corner table, and I was thankful to be able to wrap my cold, stiff fingers around the steaming cup of tea that was served to us right away. We ordered some of their most popular dishes: stir-fried beef tenderloin, dry-cooked Szechuan chicken, and spicy wontons. The beef was tender and perfectly seasoned. The chicken and wontons had just the right amount of heat. It was a meal well worth the wintry walk from the train station, but we had one more stop to make before heading back. We needed some fortifying snacks for our upcoming train journey. As we entered the Chinese bakery a block away, enticing aromas of oven-baked goods wafted through the air. We surveyed the selections in the display cases in the small shop as we inhaled the fragrant smells drifting in from the ovens and the back of the store. With great restraint, we purchased only one bag of just-out-of-the-oven pork buns, those subtly sweet, soft-baked breads filled with savory red barbecued pork. Then there were the sesame balls that were filled with smooth, sweet bean paste and some fluffy milk bread swirled with bean paste. With backpacks filled with the warm baked goods, we trekked back to Union Station. For the remaining time, We waited upstairs in the Metropolitan Lounge, looking out through a large picture window onto Chicago's bustling Canal Street outside. The day darkened into night, and the lights of the city traffic lined the streets as commuters returned home from their workday. Finally, the loudspeaker crackled, announcing, "Passengers for the city of New Orleans! It's time to board!" We lined up, and pulling luggage behind us, were led into the sudden cold to our awaiting train. There she was. Our train was called the City of New Orleans, and we were finally going to experience our first train ride in a sleeper car. The sleeper cars were towards the back, and we walked until we saw the right train car number and climbed on, pulling our suitcases up the steps behind us. We booked a roomette, and when we saw the size of it, realized that there was no way our suitcases would fit, and wheeled them back to a nearby rack in the hallway. A roomette is 1 foot wider than a standard train seat. That's it. Inside, 2 seats face each other, separated by a small pull-out table. Above, there was a berth, also the width of a seat, that could be pulled down for sleeping. The 1 foot width on the side of the seat provided you a step in which to climb up to the top berth. Incredulous might have been apt to describe my reaction to seeing our living space for the next 20 hours. How were we going to manage this, I wondered. We found spaces for our backpacks, stuffed our coats in the 4-inch wide closet next to the seat, and sat down. Rosie's roomette was across the aisle from ours, and almost immediately we began hearing voices of greeting. One man stayed and chatted for a while, catching up from when they last spoke, then finally said that he had to get back to work, but that he would be back later. All aboard for the City of New Orleans. We watched from our large window as our train left Chicago's Union Station, and as we cleared the building, we suddenly saw the glittering city lights in the nighttime sky. We saw the outlines of high-rise buildings and the headlights of cars on the highways below. At times, we even came so close to apartments with large windows that we saw people inside preparing dinner and watching TV. Then there was an announcement that dinner was being served in the dining car. For passengers in sleeper cars, meals were included in the price of the ticket. The train did not travel smoothly, making walking about challenging at times. Sometimes it lurched and bumped, requiring us to find something to hold on to as we made our way to the dining car. It looked like a modern-day diner, with its rounded blue-edged formica tables and vinyl bench seats. A woman pointed to a table for us to sit at. She decided where we were to sit, she explained, so that we could meet other passengers. Soon after we sat down, she directed a young man to sit with us as well. The menu was limited, and when the food was brought out, it did not have the appearance of being cooked to order, but instead of being previously wrapped in cellophane and reheated and then plated. But no complaints. It was obvious that the train was operated with a skeleton crew. At first, dinner conversation was a little awkward with this stranger, but he quickly ordered a whiskey, and then a second, and then a third. By his fourth, he was speaking very fluidly. He lived in a high-rise in downtown Chicago with his family. He and his wife commanded very high salaries, he as a consultant for large corporations, and she as a stockbroker for a major brokerage house. He was headed for a conference in New Orleans, and as he became more uninhibited, he admitted that though he was paid extremely well, that his job was very high stress. We bid him good night, left him at the table as he ordered another whiskey. When we returned to our roomette, the seats had been pushed together to make a bed, with white sheets, blanket, and a pillow already placed on it. The top berth had been pulled down, with bed coverings on it as well. Sleep was intermittent, and most times fleeting. While smooth in some places, rough tracks in other places rattled me awake. There were stops in the middle of the night to drop off passengers and allow new ones to board the train. I heard doors of roomettes opening near us as new passengers settled into them. I could hear the train whistle blowing at every crossing. Looking out the window, I saw the glowing lights of approaching train depots, the porch lights and neon signs of small towns, and darkness of uninhabited forests and farmlands. Finally deciding to give up on sleep while it was still dark outside, I gathered a few toiletries to head down the hall to where the bathrooms and showers were located. As I quietly stepped out of the roomette, eyes squinting to adjust to the lights of the hallway, I heard a sudden and cheerful, "Good morning!" It was Rosie. Her bed had been returned to a seat. She looked fresh and rested, her hair brushed out and perfect, clothes straight and neat. Her door was open, ready to receive visitors. Startled, I returned a mumbled greeting, and afraid that she was going to engage in conversation at such an early hour, and especially concerned at how unkempt I probably looked, I avoided eye contact and headed down the corridor. Showering on a train was also a first for me. They were clean, with small wrapped soaps and fresh towels stacked on the outside room. Water pressure was strong and temperature was comfortable, just like a hotel. At breakfast, we met Floyd. Floyd, at the prompting of his family, was taking an Amtrak trip by himself around the country. His wife of 60 years passed away. Floyd took care of her during her final years, and he was inconsolable after her death. As he spoke about her, recalling that they used to see the country together riding Amtrak, tears freely rolled down his cheeks and dripped onto his shirt, making dark splotches. He said he missed her so much and had been so depressed ever since her death that his family convinced him to take an Amtrak trip around the country. Floyd had just returned from the East Coast, was heading to New Orleans before turning west, then finally returning home to Seattle. When we returned to our roomette, the bedding had been removed and our seats returned to their original positions, and the upper berth folded back up. I spent the next hours looking out the window. The train stopped at small towns that looked like their heydays were over. I wondered what it was like living in one of those houses situated so close to and facing the tracks. Do you ever get so used to a passing train that you can actually sleep through those deafening whistles? People say you can, though that's hard for me to imagine. The train in the city of New Orleans can blaze along at speeds of up to 100 miles per hour, but averages 58 miles per hour. We passed up close views of farm fields and dense unexplored forests not accessible by car. The dark woods and swamplands looked ominous and untouched. Leafless branches on remains of trees protruded above the blackness, with algae and debris floating around the still water. Light green moss hung down from branches waving slightly as our train passed, with early morning mist slowly rising off the black swamp waters, creating a surreal scene. At lunch, we met Alan, and we insisted that Floyd join us too. Alan was returning home to Louisiana after Christmas shopping in Chicago for his kids. He was a muscular African American with dreadlocks down his back, He spoke with quiet Southern politeness, using "yes, ma'am" and "no, ma'am" when answering my questions. Alan was a barge operator on the Mississippi River. He worked for months at a time living on the barge, away from his kids. Then he was off for a few weeks. His work was hard with long days and could be very dangerous. He had witnessed 2 fellow barge workers get killed. It was a fascinating conversation as the 3 of us asked Alan many questions to learn about a profession so unfamiliar to us. The last part of the train ride we spent mostly in our roomette. I loved the privacy of it as well as the big window to look out of. We spent some time in the viewing car that was available to everyone, coach or sleeper. I knew we were close to our destination when the swamp opened into the vast waters of Lake Pontchartrain, and shortly after that we pulled into New Orleans. I loved this experience on Amtrak. It wasn't what I expected, wasn't fancy or roomy like the Orient Express. The dining wasn't elegant, but I loved it all the same, and was so glad that I finally got to experience the train called the City of New Orleans.
Riding on the City of New Orleans, Illinois Central, Monday morning rail. 15 cars and 15 restless riders, 3 conductors, 25 sacks of mail. All along the southbound Odyssey, the train pulls out at Kankakee and rolls along past houses, farms, and fields, passing trains that have no name, and freight yards full of old black men, and the graveyards of the rusted automobiles. Good morning, America, how are ya? Said, don't you know me? I'm your native son. I'm the train they call the City of New Orleans. I'll be gone 500 miles when the day is done. Dealing card games with the old man in the club car. Penny a point, ain't no one keeping score. Pass the paper bag that holds the bottle, and feel the wheels rumbling neath the floor. And the sons of Pullman porters and the sons of engineers ride their fathers' magic carpets made of steel. And mothers with their babes asleep are rocking to the gentle beat, and the rhythm of the rails is all they feel. Good morning, America, how are you? Said, don't you know me? I'm your native son. I'm the train they call the City of New Orleans. I'll be gone 500 miles when the day is done. Nighttime on the City of New Orleans, changing cars in Memphis, Tennessee. Halfway home, and we'll be there by morning. Through the Mississippi darkness, rolling down to the sea. But all the towns and people seem to fade into a bad dream and the steel rail still ain't heard the news. The conductor sings his songs again, the passengers will please refrain. This train got to disappear in railroad blues. Good night, America, how are ya? Say, don't you know me? I'm your native son. I'm the train they call the city of New Orleans. I'll be gone 500 miles when the day is done.